What's your I met a celebrity but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? My dad and I bumped into Michael Jordan at a pharmacy near Chicago. We were picking out birthday cards for my mom, and MJ and his son came in the same aisle browsing some cards. My dad kept his cool and continued to look through different cards, giving him his personal space. I, on the other hand, was 9 years old and in awe, sort of staring at him. After MJ picked out his card, he winked at me and gave me a walk-by fist bump. Didn't really set in until I was older how cool that was. I worked at a Barnes & Noble in New York as a clerk, but once or twice I'd be called over to the in-store Starbucks cafe to help out whenever they were understaffed. One time, Alan Rickman came up and ordered something, I can't recall what. I wrote Hans Gruber on his cup though. He smiled at me when he noticed it. Seems like the absolute best way to communicate. I know who you are, I'm a big fan, but I also have the self-control to respect your time and personal space. You stay classy, Zero Mig. I was in a bookstore and was in the horror section. Picked up a book by Stephen King and flipped it over and saw his picture on the back, or inside the cover. I don't really remember. I look up, and in the next aisle over, right across the bookshelf from me, is a guy that looks exactly like Stephen King. So I hold up the book and say, "Is this you?" "Yeah." "Good books. Thanks." And that was that. My husband was vacationing in California, killing time in a bar over a burger and a beer. A guy sits next to him, and my husband has a nice chat with him. The guy leaves and my husband goes to close his tab and the bartender tells him it's been covered by the guy he was talking to. The bartender asks if he knows who he was talking to. My husband has no idea. Chuck Norris, it was his bar. I helped Steven Spielberg move his daughter's bags into her college dorm. I was working a shift helping first years move in and I see a guy in a hat and sunglasses who is unmistakably Spielberg. I strike up a conversation, ask if he needs help with the bags, etc. First names only. We're from CA. My wife, Kate, and I sent all our kids to East Coast schools though, stuff like that. Later, when his daughter opened the door for the first time, he whipped out a camcorder and, wearing the biggest dad grin, recorded the whole thing before turning the camera on my friend and me to ask us about the city. So, I have a supporting the luggage, speaking role in a limited release, home movie, film shot by Steven Spielberg. Worked at a hotel and Russell Crowe came in the lobby. He went to the house phones and called front desk. Where I was working. I could see him pretty easily. I answered the phone and he asked to be connected to a room so I put him through. This wasn't long after he threw a phone at a hotel clerk so I didn't want to take a chance at pissing him off. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant right outside LA in the late 90s. One day Leonardo DiCaprio came in with who I assume was his mom to have lunch. This would have been post-Titanic, so really at the peak of his breakthrough mega celeb status. He was wearing a ball cap, sunglasses and unshaven, but I recognized him anyway. I didn't let anyone know and I wrote something like, "Your movies are awesome, I hope you liked our food," on his receipt when I dropped it off at the table. After he left, I swung by and picked up his payment, and he had left me a note back that said, "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover," with a $100 tip. Shit was awesome. I was only like 19. I went and got some PlayStation games with it after my shift ended. Was at a convenience store in LA when me and a very nicely dressed black gentleman walked up to the cashier at the same time to pay. It was night time, and he had his dark shades on and was talking on his phone. I gave him the "after you" gesture and he nodded and said, "Thanks buddy," paid and left. It wasn't until he was out of the store that I realized he was Jamie Foxx. One day my father was sitting next to Telly Savalas at some Vegas blackjack table. For about an hour they talked and bet some large amounts of money, and my father never let on that he knew the guy was famous. Telly finally says, "It's pretty cool that you haven't asked for my autograph." My father responds, "Well, you didn't ask for mine." Telly laughs and writes on a cocktail napkin, "Hey Jeff, can I have your autograph?" He carried that damn napkin with him for years. One day a bunch of us were walking in the city and we saw Conan O'Brien at a sidewalk cafe. We stopped and stared and he noticed we were talking about him. My other friend went up to his table and asked him to take a picture of us and handed him her camera. His friends at the table had a huge laugh at his expense as we posed for a picture without him in it. We never let on we knew who he was. Now we all hold dear an off-center photo of us with a funny backstory. My mom is a big sports fan. One time she was shopping at and saw a really large, fit-looking man who she didn't immediately recognize but seemed familiar. She thought it must have been a professional football player or something, so she went up to the only other person in the shop, who was this smaller weird-looking guy, and asked him if he knew who the athletic-looking man was. The short guy looked at my mom and said, "That's my bodyguard, I'm Elton John." This happened yesterday. My wife took my son to the zoo, and he wanted to read every little plaque in the reptile area. My wife was distracted for a moment, so he asked the nearest stranger to read the plaque for him. My wife turned around to see Scarlett Johansson happily reading the info to him. Her voice is so soothing, I wish she would do this for everyone. I met Justin Timberlake and had no idea it was him until someone told me afterwards. Went to a basketball game with my dad and we stopped by the bar area in the arena first. The game had just started, so it was pretty empty except for the bar itself. My dad goes to the restroom and I walk up to the bar to order a beer. There's only one seat at the bar next to a guy in a baseball cap and sunglasses. I politely ask if the seat is taken and he just says, "Nope, it's all you, man." He's sitting on my right, and eventually he says he and his wife are going to go to their seats. He extends his hand and asks my name. I tell him and ask his name. He says, "Justin. Nice to meet you, dude. Have a good night." He and his wife leave and the bartender comes up to me and says, "You know that was Justin Timberlake, right?" I immediately did a double take and couldn't believe I didn't recognize him even with the hat and sunglasses. I told my girlfriend at the time, who was a huge Justin Timberlake fan, and she couldn't believe I met him without knowing it was him. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan, so walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, do you work here?" He replied, "I mean, yeah, kind of." I say, What can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "Nah, I'm just messing with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. My dad met Robin Williams in an elevator. He got in and they rode a few floors in silence. They stopped on a floor and a bunch of fans ran in and started getting pics with Robin. My dad said he was gracious and took pics with everyone. The doors closed and they rode a few more floors and my dad turned and said, "Does that ever get old?" And Robin smiled and said, "Nope, never." Then my dad got off on his floor and they nodded to one another and my dad went on with his day. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.